Right now, there's a crow somewhere, in a city, watching you from a rooftop. You walk past. You don't notice it, but it notices you. And not just as a shape, not just as a moving object. To avoid, scientists believe it may be categorizing you, reading your behavior, deciding something about your intentions. That raises a question most of us have never thought to ask out loud. When an animal receives help from a human, does it actually understand what just happened? Does it register somewhere in that small, strange mind that you meant to help? Or is kindness, from the animal's perspective, just another random event in a world of random events? That question sounds simple. It isn't. It touches something fundamental about what consciousness is, about what it means to understand another being's intentions, about whether the emotional bridge we feel between ourselves and animals runs in both directions, or whether we've been projecting warmth into a void this whole time. The science here is real, and it's been building quietly for decades. And by the end of this, the way you look at an animal that trusts you may never quite be the same. Let's start with what we'd need for an animal to truly understand help. It's not enough to receive food from a hand and approach that hand again. Rats do that. Even insects learn to associate stimuli with outcomes. What we're asking is something deeper. Can an animal represent the intention behind an action? Can it distinguish between someone who is trying to help and someone who simply, accidentally, produced a good result? That distinction is enormous. And for a long time, the scientific consensus was that only humans could make it. That consensus began to crack in the early 2000s. One of the experiments that changed everything was deceptively simple. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, working with great apes and human children, designed a scenario where a human held food behind a barrier and either couldn't pass it through because of a physical obstacle or wouldn't, pulling the food away deliberately. The apes reached more persistently and showed more visible frustration in the won't condition than in the can't condition. They weren't just responding to the presence or absence of food. They were tracking the human's willingness. They were reading intent. That study, published in 2001 with lead researcher Michael Tomasello, suggested that chimpanzees can distinguish between an unwilling helper and an unable one. That's not a reflex. That's a model of another mind. If this kind of question makes you lean forward, there's a lot more of this on this channel, experiments, cases, and animals that will make you rethink what's happening behind those eyes. Subscribing means you won't miss what comes next. Now, here's where it gets strange, because understanding intention implies something else entirely. It implies that the animal has what psychologists call a theory of mind, the ability to attribute mental states to others. To think, in some form, that individual knows something, wants something, or intends something. For decades, this was considered the exclusive territory of humans. Then came the great apes, then ravens, then, in ways that still make researchers uncomfortable, dogs. Dogs are a special case. The domestication of dogs spans somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years, depending on the study, and that process may have shaped them into creatures uniquely tuned to human social signals in a way no other animal is. A 2002 study by Brian Hare and colleagues at Harvard showed that domestic dogs outperformed chimpanzees, our closest genetic relatives, in following human-pointing gestures to find hidden food. Chimpanzees raised alongside humans still struggled. Dogs raised without special training succeeded. The working hypothesis is that dogs have been, in a very literal sense, evolutionarily shaped to read human communicative intent. They didn't just learn to tolerate us, they learned to understand us. But understanding a gesture is still different from understanding help. The question that sits underneath all of this is whether an animal can look at what a human did and understand not just the outcome, but the why. Think about what you'd need for that. You'd need memory. You'd need the ability to connect a past action to a present emotional state. You'd need something like gratitude, or at minimum, a behavioral analog to it, a recognition that this particular individual did something that benefited me, and that this matters for how I should treat them. And here's what's remarkable. Researchers have found evidence of exactly this in places that surprise you every time. Ravens, those black-feathered, mathematically brilliant birds, have been studied extensively by Bernd Heinrich and later by Thomas Bugniar at the University of Vienna. What Bugniar's lab found is that ravens form long-term social bonds, track individual reputations, and appear to adjust their behavior based on past interactions with specific individuals. A raven that has received help from a particular bird, or a particular human, behaves differently toward that individual in subsequent encounters. They remember. And they remember in a way that seems to account for the relationship, not just the event. This is the part that science still can't fully explain, because the line between conditioned response and genuine recognition of help is philosophically slippery. But the behavioral data keeps accumulating. What do you think? Have you ever had an animal treat you differently after you helped it? Leave a comment below, because what people share about these moments is often more remarkable than any study. Let's talk about elephants, because no conversation about animal understanding of human intention is complete without them. Elephants have the largest brain of any land animal, a complex social structure built on emotional intelligence, and a documented capacity for something that looks, from the outside, exactly like grief. The orca Tahlequah, in 2018, carried her dead calf through the waters of the Pacific for 17 days. An act observed and documented by researchers at the Center for Whale Research that became one of the most discussed examples of animal mourning in modern science. But with elephants, the evidence for something deeper, something that approaches the understanding of human kindness, comes from places like the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust in Kenya, where orphaned elephants are raised by human keepers. What researchers and keepers have observed, and this has been documented over decades, is that these elephants don't simply become habituated to human presence. They form specific attachments to specific individuals. They grieve when those individuals leave. They respond to the return of a beloved keeper with vocalizations and physical behavior that mirror reunion behavior between elephants who know each other well. They are not responding to humans as a category. They are responding to you, this specific you, who showed up on this specific day and stayed. Franz de Waal, the primatologist whose work on empathy in animals reshaped the field, argued throughout his career that the dichotomy between human emotional intelligence and animal instinct is a false one. In his 2009 book, The Age of Empathy, he documented case after case of consolation behavior, reconciliation, and what he called targeted helping in chimpanzees' behavior, where one individual assists another in a way that is clearly adjusted to the specific need of the receiver. That's not generalized altruism. That's understanding a situation and responding to it with intention. And here's the thought that follows naturally from all of this, the one that's been building quietly since the beginning. If animals can understand intention in others, what do they make of us? There are documented cases of wild animals approaching humans for help, and not in the opportunistic way a gull steals your chips. A humpback whale entangled in crab trap lines, observed in 2011 off the coast of California, allowed a team of divers to approach and cut the ropes free. What was remarkable was not just that it held still, it was what happened after. The whale circled back. It approached each diver in turn. The lead diver, James Mosquito, described the whale nudging him gently, making sounds he had never heard from a whale before. Scientists are careful about interpreting this, but the behavior was documented, it was observed by multiple witnesses, and it is difficult to explain purely in terms of reflex. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by a prominent group of neuroscientists, stated explicitly that non-human animals possess the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. That was a landmark moment not because it discovered something new, but because it formalized what many researchers had believed privately for years. These are not empty machines. Whatever is happening inside them, it is something. The question is not whether there is experience. The question is, what kind? Thomas Nagel asked, in his 1974 essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" Whether we can ever truly know what it is like to be a non-human animal from the inside. He concluded that we probably cannot, not fully. But here's what that means for what you're watching right now. It doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means there's something there we don't have the instruments to measure yet. And that brings us back to the crow on the rooftop. There is a study conducted by John Marsluff at the University of Washington in which researchers wore specific masks while trapping and banding crows on campus. Months later, years later, in some cases the crows still responded with alarm calls, specifically when they saw someone wearing that mask. They remembered the face. They remembered the threat. And crucially, they communicated that memory to other crows who had never had any interaction with the masked researchers. But Marsluff's team also found that when humans acted neutrally or positively toward crows over time, the birds' behavior shifted. They became less reactive. Some appeared, by behavioral measure, to recognize a safe individual. The same brain that remembers a threat can recognize safety. The same brain that notices danger can notice help. Here is what sits at the heart of all of this. The loop that opened at the beginning of this video. Does an animal understand when a human is helping? The honest, scientific answer, based on everything we've covered here, is yes, and the depth of that understanding varies with the species, the relationship, and the individual. But across the board, from ravens to elephants to dogs to whales, there is evidence that animals are not just receiving the outcomes of our actions. Some of them are reading us. Some of them are tracking our intentions, building a model of what we are and what we mean. Some of them, after years of contact, may carry something that functions like trust. That's not projection. That's biology meeting something it was never supposed to meet and not knowing what to do with it. That's two kinds of mind, shaped by completely different evolutionary histories, finding each other across an enormous gap, and sometimes, quietly, bridging it. The next time an animal looks at you, really looks at you, holds your gaze for a moment longer than seems necessary, consider that it may be doing exactly what you are doing, trying to figure out what kind of creature this is, whether it means well, whether it can be trusted. The science says, sometimes, they know. And if that changes something in how you see the animal beside you, then this question was worth asking. If this opened something for you, share it with someone who has ever looked into an animal's eyes and wondered what was looking back. And if you found it valuable, a like takes 2 seconds, and it helps more people find their way to questions like this one.